Imagine waking up to find that the very land your family has cherished for generations is being hijacked by a crooked HOA, only to discover that you hold the power to shut it all down. It all began on what I thought would be just another ordinary Tuesday. I had spent the weekend tending to my little vegetable garden and feeding the chickens on my beloved family farm, a sprawling 15 acres that had been passed down for generations. As a county building inspector, I was no stranger to paperwork and permits, but nothing in my experience could have prepared me for the shock that awaited me on that fateful morning. I remember the moment vividly. I was collecting eggs when I heard the rumble of engines in the distance. Curiosity and a sudden twinge of unease propelled me out the back door and down the hill toward the south pasture. There, to my disbelief, I saw 3 individuals in matching polo shirts, carefully placing stakes in my field. Leading them was a woman whose icy blue eyes and carefully styled blonde hair commanded attention. She smiled at me, a smile that sent chills down my spine, and introduced herself as Eleanor Hargrove, the so-called president of a homeowners association that, as far as I knew, had no business on my farmland. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my tone even despite the shock racing through me. "What exactly are you doing on my property?" Eleanor's smile tightened imperceptibly as she replied in a tone that was both condescending and calm. "According to our records, this property has been incorporated into our development. We are preparing to break ground on a new gas station next week." My heart sank. I had never signed anything that would allow an HOA, or anyone else, to commandeer my land for commercial purposes. Her words echoed in my mind as she handed me a folder of documents that, on the surface, appeared official. But something was off. The rezoning papers bore my signature at the bottom, a signature I had never given. I knew instantly that these documents were forged. When I pointed this out, her eyes narrowed, and she warned me to be careful with my accusations, insisting that their legal team was more than capable of handling any objections. Not wanting to escalate things immediately, I made a mental note of every detail. That day marked the beginning of a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, a struggle against a corrupt system that had been infiltrated by the Hargrove family. I returned to my farmhouse, my mind reeling, and spread the documents out on my kitchen table. The official stamps and county signatures looked authentic, yet the timing was off. My approval date coincided with a vacation I'd taken in a remote mountain area, completely out of cell service. How could that have happened? I decided to call a trusted colleague from the zoning department, Marcos, who had always been a beacon of integrity in a sea of questionable decisions. Over the phone, I explained my findings. Marcos's voice was a mix of disbelief and concern as he checked the system. "There's no record of any application for a gas station on your property," he confirmed. "In fact, there's no such HOA on file for your area." His words validated my suspicions that something nefarious was at work. Before long, I received a cease and desist order delivered to my door by a deputy I didn't recognize, a document that prohibited me from interfering with the so-called Network Estates development project. The irony was palpable. The very family that claimed legal ownership over my land was now using government influence to silence me. As I read the order, my phone buzzed with an ominous text message, "Back off if you know what's good for you." I felt a surge of both fear and determination. I couldn't let them erase my family's legacy without a fight. The next morning, my worst fears were confirmed. As dawn broke, I watched from my kitchen window as bulldozers and construction crews arrived at my property. Eleanor stood on my porch, a document in hand, announcing that an emergency construction permit had been approved, an authorization that should have been impossible under any normal circumstances. I stepped outside, my voice steady even as my heart pounded in my chest, and demanded to know the legitimacy of this permit. One of the workers hesitated, mentioning that they couldn't even begin the excavation without water permits, given that my land was part of a protected aquifer. Eleanor's calm facade wavered for a split second, and I knew then that I had found my opening. I pulled out my county inspector badge, something I had kept hidden until this moment, and informed them that I was halting all work until every permit was thoroughly verified. The crew's expressions shifted from defiance to uncertainty as I continued, detailing how the environmental impact statement was missing and the public hearing never occurred. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't just fighting a rogue development. I was battling a deeply entrenched system of corruption. Back at the county records office, Marcos and I pored over files and maps, comparing the new, suspicious documents with the original deeds that had been with my family for decades. It didn't take long to uncover the disturbing truth. A shell company, MGC Holdings, owned by none other than the Hargrove family, had been quietly buying up land in the surrounding area. Their ultimate plan was to build not just a gas station, but a sprawling commercial complex, complete with a truck stop and shopping center, aimed at pocketing enormous profits at the expense of local residents. The deeper we dug, the more alarming the conspiracy became. I discovered that several county officials, including the sheriff and even members of my own department, were implicated in this fraudulent scheme. It was as if the Hargroves had woven themselves into every fabric of local governance, ensuring that anyone who dared oppose them would be silenced. Even my own job was on the line. The moment I made my dissent known, I received a termination letter, followed by a foreclosure notice on my family farm. The Hargroves were systematically erasing my life, piece by piece. Determined not to back down, I decided to meet with a small group of like-minded locals at Rusty's Diner, a modest, nostalgic eatery on the edge of town known for its unbeatable apple pie and a sense of community that had somehow managed to survive the creeping corruption. As I walked into the diner, I was greeted by familiar faces: a tall, gentle man named Harold Jenkins, a petite woman in a floral dress named Margaret, and several other senior citizens who had all been victims of the Hargrove schemes. The atmosphere was heavy with both anger and resolve. We huddled around a battered table, our voices hushed yet determined as we shared our stories of betrayal. Harold recounted how his retirement home had been seized through bogus legal channels, while Margaret revealed stacks of evidence, photographs, meeting minutes, bank statements that meticulously documented every fraudulent transaction orchestrated by the Hargroves. I couldn't help but feel a surge of hope as we realized that our personal tragedies were part of a much larger pattern, one that could be dismantled if we stood together. With our evidence in hand, Marcos and I began to strategize. We knew that stopping the demolition scheduled for the following Friday was our best chance to halt the illegal construction permanently. We had to gather every shred of proof we could before the bulldozers arrived at dawn. The pressure was mounting as I navigated phone calls from unknown numbers, each carrying thinly veiled threats, and dodged surveillance from a black SUV that seemed to follow my every move. The situation escalated quickly. One afternoon, as I was driving back from the county records office with a binder full of incriminating documents, I noticed a sleek, dark SUV tailing me. My heart raced as I recalled the ominous text messages, and I realized that the Hargroves were not only willing to manipulate government records, they were also willing to use intimidation tactics to silence dissent. I managed to slip away by taking winding back roads, but the feeling of being constantly watched never left me. Late one rainy evening, as I sat in the dim light of my farmhouse, I pieced together the final puzzle. I discovered an old letter hidden in my grandfather's desk, warning of developers who planned to seize our family land for a highway exit, a warning that was all too prophetic. It became clear that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger strategy to strip away the rights of long-standing community members like myself. The climax came on the day of the demolition. As dawn broke, I raced to the property with Marcos and a small group of allies. We formed a human chain in front of the bulldozers, our voices united in protest. The scene was surreal. Construction equipment halted mid-operation, confused workers looking to their superiors for orders, and Eleanor Hargrove standing stoically at the center of it all, her earlier poise now replaced by barely concealed fury. I stepped forward and, with my county inspector badge gleaming in the early light, declared a formal stop work order until every permit was re-examined and validated. In the ensuing chaos, I received a final, chilling text: "You've made a deadly mistake." The words sent a shiver down my spine, yet I stood firm, bolstered by the sight of my community, elderly neighbors, families, and even former colleagues, standing beside me. It was in that moment I realized that our struggle was about far more than just one piece of land. It was about defending our homes, our history, and the integrity of our local government. Later that day, as news cameras began to document the standoff and local media picked up the story, the tide seemed to turn. A major newspaper published an expose detailing the Hargrove family's entire scheme, complete with the forged documents, testimonies from disgruntled residents, and internal records showing the web of corruption that had infiltrated our county. The public outcry was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, state investigators swooped in, freezing the Hargrove assets and launching a full-scale inquiry into the illegal activities. Even though the immediate threat of the gas station was halted, the battle was far from over. The Hargroves, realizing that their grip on power was slipping, began to target anyone who dared speak out against them. I lost my job, and my bank threatened foreclosure on my beloved farm. But I had already ignited a spark of resistance that spread throughout the community. Meetings were held, petitions were signed, and more evidence came to light. Every day, new testimonies from those who had been wronged bolstered our fight against corruption. In the months that followed, I watched as our small town transformed into a beacon of community activism. Neighbors organized watchdog groups, held rallies, and took to social media to demand transparency and accountability. Despite the many hardships, including personal losses and constant threats, I found strength in the unwavering support of those around me. I learned that true power doesn't lie in money or influence, but in the collective will of a community determined to defend what is right. Looking back now, as I stand on the threshold of a new chapter in my life, I am reminded of that fateful morning when I first encountered Eleanor Hargrove and her team on my property. What began as a personal battle to reclaim my family's land evolved into a full-blown crusade against corruption, a crusade that not only saved our community from an illegal gas station, but also exposed the deep-seated rot in our local government. And while the scars of that struggle remain, they also serve as a constant reminder that even in the face of overwhelming power, the truth, and the resilience of ordinary people can prevail. I share this story with you today not just as a cautionary tale, but as a celebration of community spirit, determination, and the unyielding power of truth. It's a reminder that when we stand together, even the most corrupt forces can be held accountable, and our voices, no matter how small they may seem, can change the course of history. Thank you for listening, and remember, never let anyone steal your legacy without a fight.